everyone, and welcome back to the 34th episode of Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm Colin McFader, and as always, I'm joined by Clark Coffey. How's it going?
Hey, man, it's going great. I couldn't be more excited for the film that we are about to discuss today.
Yeah, the grand reveal.
The grand reveal.
Even though,
Yeah,
if
go
you
ahead.
haven't read the title of this episode, we are going to be doing Francis Ford Coppola's Rumblefish
from 1983. Yeah, and it's my baby.
Review.
Yeah, I in the same way. So we've done, we did Mad Max, the trilogy, and I talked about how that was, a really important series of films from my childhood, and specifically The Road Warrior. But if you held a gun to my head and you said, but please nobody do that. But if you held a gun to my head and somebody said, okay, you got to pick one. You got to pick one film that sums up your love of cinema. So that's that. I mean, I don't know another way to make a more significant statement than that as far as what's your favorite film. So the film that sums up my love of cinema more than any other film I've ever seen is Rumblefish.
Mm-hmm.
So I
hadn't actually never seen it before. So I had seen The Outsiders, which was made kind of back to back with this.
Yep.
Not planned. When they were doing The Outsiders, he hadn't prior to that been like, I'm going to do a double, S.E. Hinton feature kind of thing. But midway through the production of The Outsiders, he kind of realized that he wanted to do Rumblefish, and so he and S.E. Hinton used their days off from The Outsiders to write this screenplay.
Yeah.
And there's a few changes from the screenplay or from the book, but it's actually quite similar as far as I'm aware. I've never actually read the Rumblefish book. I've read The Outsiders and seen the movie and stuff like that. But yeah, this is the first time that I had seen. So very in stark contrast to Clark, who again as a kid,
well,
this
it'll
was a really
be great
important movie to you and kind of throughout your life. Whereas me, I'd first seen it. In the past few days. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that's going to be great because whereas I have this rich personal history with it, and I can speak to that. I mean, what I can't do though is speak with any objectivity to this film. So that's going to be fun that you're going to be able to do that, and you're also going to have a unique perspective, I think, a little bit from. I grew up in the Midwest, and so this film was shot in Tulsa, and we can talk about this a bit more as we go through the podcast, but. For me, this film very much feels close to how I grew up and where I grew up. And, for you having not grown up in the States, it'll be interesting to kind of, you'll have a different take a little bit on the geography of this film and everything too. So,
we don't really have Midwest culture up here. We have prairie culture, but I think what's interesting about that, you mentioned that, and this does sort of relate to both our relationships with the movie and the movie itself, is that the U.S. is very much built kind of around the coasts. The coasts are the most populated. They're kind of the big parts of the states. And the center is, it's the flyover states, right?
Right.
Whereas here, it's very, I live in Toronto, and Toronto is only a 45-minute flight to New York, but Toronto's not near the ocean. It's our East Coast goes out a lot more east than the U.S. East Coast. So to get to, Newfoundland or even Nova Scotia, it's a good 2-3 day drive.
Yeah.
And those places are very, not totally sparsely populated. There's cities there, but they're not the big, financial, economic, cultural centers like in the States. We have Vancouver out west, of course, which is on the coast, but Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver are kind of the big three cities here, and Montreal and Toronto are both located pretty centrally within the country. So we kind of don't have that same the desire of opportunity being on the coast or this drive to go out to the coasts, whereas the States really doesn't. That's a big theme in this movie, is this drive to escape kind of the Midwest and get to I guess you could call it the end goal, which is the ocean.
Get to the ocean. Yeah. Well, that Western expansion and kind of manifest destiny, those are, I think those are things that are wrapped up a little bit into the story too.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about all those things, but I hopefully if you're listening, you've seen this film, and if you haven't, boy, I mean, clearly, as you can tell, I highly recommend you see it, but just to kind of give a little bit of an overbook. I mean, so you'd mentioned, Cullen, it's based on a book by S.E. Susie Hinton. And Coppola wrote it with Hinton, like you said, while they were working on Outsiders, which was also written by S.E. Hinton. She also wrote Text. It's a trilogy of stories for young adults. She kind of is not that clearly, like literature for young people existed before S.E. Hinton, of course. I mean, Tom Sawyer and Catcher in the Rye. There's a lot of books, but she is kind of credited with kind of creating or popularizing the modern like literature for youth.
The genre on its own, yeah.
Yeah,
So
genre
did
on
you
its own.
read like The Outsiders and stuff like that when you were in middle school and stuff? Because I did. It was,
Yeah,
in the
so I read
curriculums and all that. So
Outsiders, and I'm
yeah.
trying to remember. I almost feel like it might have been canon. I almost feel like it was part of the curriculum, but I did not. And this is wild. I know everybody out there is gonna, as much as I love Rumblefish, how could I have not? I have not read Rumblefish.
Interesting.
I've
Okay. Yeah.
not read the original book. Which of course, now that I hear myself say that, I really should do so. It's on my list. But I mean, you've got such amazing talent in this film. Like we said, Coppola directs. You've got Matt Dillon starring as Rusty James. You have Mickey Rourke, and I'll talk about him more when we get to the performances. But to me, this is one of the most significant performances of my young career or young life, rather. I mean, sorry, and was a significant impetus for me to even pursue acting and filmmaking. We've got a young Diane Lane. We've got a really young Nicolas Cage.
Yes.
I think this is maybe his
Pre
second.
Moonstruck, pre all that. Yeah. Yeah.
He's like 19, I think. It's
Yeah.
amazing. You've got a young Chris Penn, Diana Scarwood. You've got Dennis Hopper.
Of course, noted Coppola alum. So.
And you've got Tom Waits. What? I mean, it's amazing. And look, you're talking about a black and white film shot on that beautiful Plus X 5231, that Eastman stock that, at least in part, that the Elephant Man that we recently did was shot on. And Cullen, I know you're super excited about this. This thing was shot wide.
Very wide, yes.
A lot of this is shot at, less than 10 millimeters, 9.8. 25 and 35, I think, is maybe the longest lens they used, except for there's one kind of walk and talk where Lawrence Fishburne. Come on, and Lawrence
Fishburne,
is in it.
Who is also in Apocalypse Now. Yeah.
Who's also in Apocalypse Now. I mean, it's just. I mean, this film is just bursting at the seams with talent. And all this youth and energy. It's such a fun film. So let's talk. I mean, let's jump in then. Let's talk about kind of and compare and contrast our personal experiences with the film. I mean, let's start with you. You've just watched it in the past couple days. Like, tell me about your experience with the film. What you thought watching it. Yeah.
As I said, The Outsiders was in my curriculum as a kid in middle school, and we watched the movie then. And I remember I knew, of course, who Francis Ford Coppola was. I think it was probably grade 8 when we watched it. And so I'd seen The Godfather, I'd seen Apocalypse Now, and I think The Outsiders kind of underwhelmed me because of that. And so had I known that this was made back to back to that before going into it, I likely would have had a different impression going in, and I probably would have thought, okay, I didn't love The Outsiders, so I might not love this one. But I actually didn't know until, basically while I was watching it, realized that half the cast was the same location, and so afterwards, found out that of course they were shot back to back. I loved it. Again, I didn't know what to expect. Had no idea going into it. I knew it was Coppola, and I knew, who was in it. I knew vaguely what it was about, but didn't realize how artistic the film was. How, almost transcendent of like time, in terms of like decade set or period set, that it pulls so much from so many different aspects of especially American life. And so I think that's really it was really interesting to me, just the way that it handled all that material and how the characters, again, like the relationships between the friends almost speak like they're coming from the 1950s, but it's set in the, like they play, a stand-up arcade game at one point. So it's not set in the 50s. There's and then Dennis Hopper plays
timeless.
like this, he's the father, but Dennis Hopper plays this kind of almost like vagabond, Depression era, like fedora wearing, flask drinking drunk. And it's like this really interesting, blend of almost like all the 20th century in the United States and all these different cultures and climates that the States kind of has. It kind of boils them all down and puts them into this one motion picture, while doing so in this avant-garde, like French New Wave style. And I thought that, again, I like watching a movie and being feeling like I got the rug swept from under me, like feeling like I had no idea what I was expecting and that this very much wasn't what I was expecting. I love doing that and I like that experience. And so I think that going into this, and also that it really talked to my sensibilities about that, and both you and I have kind of spoken about this before on the podcast, but that, plot to me is never something that's super vital. I'm not a plot person. I don't
Yeah.
really like as I always say, I could watch a movie that's 9 hours of like beautiful images of trees. I like the visceral imagery in film. I think that that's what really speaks to me. And so I'm never someone who's like going to sit down and be like, well, this doesn't use the 3-act structure.
Right.
Save the Cat says that you should introduce conflict in this point of the movie, and if you don't, then
Right.
you failed.
Yeah.
I'm not really interested in that aspect, and perhaps that's why I don't really consider myself much of a screenwriter. Even though I have written screenplays, it's not really the point of filmmaking that I like dive in on, and that I really care about on a really deep level. And so this film really spoke to me on that level as well, that it kind of spoke to my sensibilities and what I like about film, which is about the visceral kind of experience of watching, not necessarily about understanding or analyzing what's going on moment to moment in the script, but rather just kind of letting the experience wash over you and give you those emotional impact moments and give you the elements of filmmaking that I think really stand out to me, which is like really strong performances, really great camera work, and masterful, rich storytelling in the cinematography, and things like that, and the direction. That's what really gets me in this movie. Kind of has all those things. So that was my first impression of it. Again, this being
were
the
you
first time I'd seen it.
surprised? Were you? I mean, obviously, I'm assuming that it was within seconds that you realized, "Whoa, this is not Outsiders 2."
Yeah. I was not. I wouldn't say surprised is the right word, because again, I didn't know that they were related. I was unaware,
yeah.
but I would say that definitely satisfied is probably like almost this feeling of watching it and knowing it was Coppola, who's a director that I really respect and admire. Even his lesser works I like a lot. Like again, The Outsiders I think is a good movie. It's just not my favorite of his.
Yeah.
And so I think that watching this almost made me go, this is what I thought The Outsiders was missing.
Ah.
That if The Outsiders took this less, because The Outsiders also, to be fair, is much more of a planned out studio film, whereas this was, because it was so off the cuff, he kind of just went, and I think it was, who did he do The Outsiders with? Was it MGM or Fox or someone? Whoever the studio was that was doing The Outsiders said that they didn't want to do Rumblefish, so he struck a deal with Universal.
Yeah.
Kind of last minute. And so that almost worked out in his favor because Universal didn't have the chance to kind of jump on it and make all these notes in pre-production and sort of control the production of this film. He really had so much
And
control
Coppola even
over
put in
where
his
it
own
was.
money. Coppola even self-financed a bit of the roughly $10 million budget. But that's my understanding is that they actually ran out of money. And Coppola, as he's had to do before with Apocalypse Now and other films, I mean, he puts his money where his mouth is, and he had to self-finance. Yeah, so that it
very
is
much like Herzog does as well. Herzog has done it several times, and so I think that kind of shows, when a filmmaker really is passionate. And to get into kind of what your relationship was, this film is very personal for Coppola. That Coppola's, he says that he connected to the source material because of his relationship with his brother, who the
it's
film is actually
dedicated
dedicated to. Yeah. So I think that it's really interesting that this is, such a personal film for Coppola. And of course, I've also got an older brother, but I think that your relationship with your brother is likely very different than my relationship with my brother. So I'm curious to see and kind of hear about what was your first viewing. Why is it stuck with you?
Yeah. I mean, good question. So I can't. It's funny. I can't remember the exact the first time I ever watched it. That the first viewing. I have lost that memory. I don't know. When I think about this film, for me, it's like it just seems like this is a film that I have loved and cherished for so long that it's like a part of me. If that makes sense. I kind of have the vaguest of recollections that, and it's very likely that how I first watched this film was how I first watched many of the films that were significant to me when I was a child, which is like purely by chance, which doesn't exist very much in today's day and age with how stories are consumed. I refuse to use the word content. Screw that
Yes.
word. But
Yeah.
you have films. I can say cinema. I can say movies. I can say flicks. I can say a lot of different things, but I'm not ever going to call this content.
Mhm.
Today's day and age, I'm gonna like date myself and sound like an old fart, but it's like it's hard to watch something by accident today because you have to pick it. You have to go on Netflix or
Yeah.
Hulu or HBO Max or wherever,
Nobody's sitting on like AMC and like browsing their movie. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like you might spend a half hour, you might spend more time trying to find something to watch than you do watching it, but you're in command.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, that wasn't the case, and I thought I was like just over the moon delighted that we occasionally had HBO, that we had
Mhm.
cable was like a huge deal,
Mhm.
and so likely that's what it was. Likely this was like something where I was like up at in the middle of the night in my bedroom on my probably would have been like a 12-inch TV
Yep. With the
and
rabbit ears.
rabbit ears, but
Yeah.
but we did have cable, and so I had like this I my room for a large chunk of my childhood was like in an unfinished basement, and I like
Right.
lived at the end of it, and it was like bare concrete walls with like the top
You were the
half.
Elephant Man.
I was I was the elephant man. Yeah, I know. It's funny that you mentioned that. I do often use that line to my wife. I'm not an animal. I don't know if she believes me still yet to this day. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it's like my cave. I mean, it's like this almost literal cave, and I had this like piece of coax that was like strung from the rafters, in this unfinished ceiling, and it like came down and connected to this tiny little 12-inch TV. I think I actually was like lucky enough to have a color TV by then, because the first TV I had was black and white for the biggest, for a large chunk of my childhood, and I'm
Mhm.
sure this film came on. So I saw it, 2-3 years after its theatrical release, likely on HBO. And I'm sitting, alone in the middle of the night and watching this film, and it really blew me away. And I likely had no idea who the hell Francis Ford Coppola was on any conscious level at that point in time. Even though I may have likely been familiar with Godfather, I don't think I really knew directors by name or anything at this point. I probably was 10, 11, 12, something. Maybe Spielberg was the only person I really understood to be a director who made films.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it has for so long been such an important film to me, and that importance has changed. I mean, when I first saw this film, I probably resonated more strongly with, I was captivated by this idea of leaving the Midwest and of going west and of like kind of fulfilling a certain destiny. Clearly this film has kind of these mythological undertones, right? These kind of like a lot of great stories. There are these kind of universal truths that are embodied in these characters and embodied in this story. And that likely just really resonated with me. I think
Mhm.
I was captivated by the motorcycle boy, and this idea of this quiet wisdom after having gone on this journey, and it was a journey that I wanted to go on, and I was excited to take, and now the story means a lot of different things to me, though. At that time when I saw it, I'm sure I was old enough to have had a brother, but we're 10 years apart, and so he would have been very young and I was young.
Mhm.
But over time the meaning has really changed a lot to me. When I watch the film now, what resonates with me a lot is the story, kind of, it's still that growing up in the Midwest and wanting to leave that. And certainly I did not by any stretch of the imagination have a familial situation like I didn't have a father like Dennis Hopper portrays in this film or anything
Mhm.
like that, not even remotely. I mean, the opposite of that. But still, it was, I think, this very natural desire to want to leave where you're at and strike out on your own and make your own way and be your own person. And for whatever reason, existentialism has kind of like always spoken to me, which is an extrapolation of this idea of like westward expansion if you're an American, which is kind of, realizing that you're in control of your purpose, and that you get to
Right.
build
Yeah.
that, and that you get to decide that. And it's both a blessing and a curse that it's not a given. So you do have you're empowered to define your own purpose, but then you also have the responsibility of defining your own purpose. And so I think that's very much a part of what this film's about. And of course, time is a big part of the story as a theme, and that spoke to me. I mean, I don't know why, but when I was a kid, I always had this fear of running out of time. I was like always terrified that everybody around me was going to die and that I was going to run out of time. And I don't know what in the heck still to this day that's about. But I mean, even as a very young child, I was like always terrified my grandparents were going to die any minute, or that my parents were going to die. That, you know, it's like that, you know, I was going to run out of time and I wasn't going to be able to do the things I wanted to do in life, which it's kind of nuts to think about it now. It's like a 12-year-old worrying about that, but it did. I would just cry all the time about that. Every time I would my parents would leave, my grandparents rather would leave for a visit, I had this period of time where I would just like sob that I was thinking like everybody around me was going to die and I would run out of time. So those were things that spoke to me about it then. I mean, also too, just on a surface level, you know, you talk about how images, you know, the images are so powerful in this film and they speak to you on such a primal level, and it's not about plot. And, you know, large part of it is that I could try to explain to you why it meant something to me, but I don't know if I can't explain all of it away.
Yeah.
The images are so powerful. Mickey Rourke's performance was so captivating to me. There's just something kind of primal about it that just captivated me. But
well, I mean, again, it's interesting that you say that, because it's similar to kind of my response to Butch Cassidy, which was it's interesting being put on the podium and kind of saying like, you know, explain why this means something, because especially when you see it at such a young age, it's difficult to really talk about what, you know, like again, like last week I was talking about, okay, there were a few things in it that made, you know, I grew up hiking the Rocky Mountains, so there was like aesthetic things there that made me connect to it. And you're talking about, you know, your brother and things like that and growing up in the Midwest, but when it comes to like the really like I'm sure there are other movies set in the Midwest and about longing to leave the Midwest that didn't connect with you, that you know, that you know, you don't really feel. So it's such a combination. It's almost like a perfect storm of like 1,000 different elements that
right thing
come
at the
together,
right time.
And that's a great feel. You know, that's a great feeling when a movie like I think that's the thing, when a movie speaks to you. Recently, I had a similar experience. But probably not recently, but within the last 4 years, I think it came out. Lady Bird, the Greta Gerwig film.
Okay.
I really liked that movie a lot, and you know, it was a similar thing where it was like it just something on a very fundamental level. Exactly. Like it was just like not necessarily that I like related to the character as, you know, as much
literally.
As I'm sure that you're not Matt Dillon. You weren't probably Matt Dillon as a kid. You know, you weren't going out and having gang fights and stuff like that. But,
well, you know,
but there's I don't know that about you. Yeah, I know. Perhaps that's the life you left behind in the Midwest. But
I will not give away all my secrets here on the podcast.
Yeah, so. But again, and it's like I'm not the Lady Bird in that movie, but there's something again just about like almost the desire element of it, and just the circumstance and the things that just go on in the movie, that it almost makes it feel like it's like this like other part of you, like you in another life or something. It's interesting.
That's you know, and I do want to add too. I think you're right. I really like how you just put that, and I want to add to that too, because not every film does this, or not every work of art does this. So now, fast forward 30 plus years later, and I'm watching the film. I actually watched it over the course of, I watched it a couple times over the course of last night and today and this morning in preparation for this podcast. And now very different colors emerge. No pun intended. It's a black and white film, but very different texture emerges now for me. A lot of different things stand out for this film. And I was actually emotionally impacted by this viewing. It really caught me off guard. It knocked me off my feet. I was surprised at how emotionally impactful this film was by the time I got to the end of it, and in very different ways. Now, what stands out to me more about this film is my own history of, so I did leave the Midwest, and I did move to California, and a lot of California does get in the way of making it to the ocean. And I you know, I left home. I didn't make my way out to California until later, but I left home at 18, and I left a younger brother who was 8 who I was close to. I mean, still am, but I was close to him, even though we were 10 years difference. And I left like all kids, I left for college, or like most kids do. I left for college, and I'm 18, and I'm so absorbed in my own life and my own adventure that I frankly didn't think about very much the fact that I was leaving my brother,
Right. Right.
and what kind of impact that would have on him. And it wasn't until much later that I've started to understand what an impact that had on him, and what that, and what that kind of means, what the cost of like striking out on your own sometimes can mean for those around you. And he even came out, and I won't go so far as to say followed me out to California. I would never be so vain as to think that that was his impetus for coming out here. It was likely some of his reasoning, but he followed me out to California later. And so there's these strange parallels to my personal story in relationship to my brother. And there are even others that I won't waste all of our time going into great detail here, just from the perspective of kind of what our personalities are like, that I kind of can very much relate to Mickey Rourke's character. And there are aspects of Matt Dillon's character that I can see in my brother in some kind of high level generic ways. But just a lot of things seem to so now it's a very different film to me. None of that existed when I first watched this film, and it first kind of burrowed its way into my heart and mind, and now it's grown into this. And if that's not the definition of some kick butt art, then I don't know what is.
Yeah. Yeah, something that can kind of again mold and almost transform as you like that. There's different aspects to it. There's different avenues to enter into the movie.
Yeah.
And I think that, and again, what's interesting to me too is I have an older brother, but I wouldn't say that my relationship with my older brother is reflected in this movie at all, and so it's not something that I related to on that level. But I would even almost say that there wasn't a ton in the movie that I related to really on any level, because again, it is a very much I would say like an American movie, and I don't mean that in the sense of like it's a big Hollywood picture. I mean that it kind of exudes the elements of the United States, and as similar in a lot of ways and as close geographically as Canada and the U.S. are. There's a lot of cultural elements and a lot of things that are really, really different, like vastly different. There's like canyons between these aspirations, and even just down to the idea of, you mentioned leaving for college and things like that. Like that's not even really a thing here. People go away for school, but it's not such a huge thing here as it is in the States, of like this, like I'm going out of state for school and stuff. So there wasn't a ton of relation for me for it. But what I think is interesting about that is that despite that, it still was very interesting to me. It still was something that almost like I liked to watch as almost an examination of this stuff, and because of that, it was really neat to kind of watch, and it's not like I was totally blindsided by these elements of American culture and that I had no idea that these things existed.
Right, you've never seen it before.
but it was sort of interesting again to see such like a boiled down version of it, and I think that's really what spoke to me a lot, was that it was like just 1,000 different elements of American culture all brought into this really, really well thought out, really well crafted, almost think piece by Coppola, and which is interesting too, because the book, I believe, is actually set in the 50s, which again the movie isn't. The movie is set kind of. It's obviously contemporary to the 80s, but,
I think,
or maybe it's 60s, yeah. But the book has a very specific, setting in terms of time.
Well, I think it's an interesting combination. I mean, you have the author of the story, Susie Hinton. You have she grew up in Tulsa. She grew up and I think lived her entire life, if I'm not mistaken, in that area. So you have a very strong singular voice coming from this geographic and cultural area. And then you have Coppola, who I think has, family, like a different aspect of, but still very strongly American culture, kind of American family culture aspects of that. I mean, even in films like the Godfather films are kind of, these extrapolations of American family culture to some extent. And I, so I think you put those two things together, or those two people together, those two minds together. And I feel like that's why you have such an important, or kind of, a very strong specific flavor of that. of what you're talking about that you can feel as a non-Midwestern American person watching this film, and it's likely what spoke to me so personally without me even realizing it, because
Yes,
that's
yeah,
where I
yeah.
grew up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Yeah, that's a really neat, I guess, dissection of like
Yeah.
why it kind of affected each of us. Because
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, I think it's amazing. I mean, let's like it's. I always love to start there. It's our kind of personal relationships to the film. I again, like I keep kind of reiterating, but it's so interesting to me. I love to compare those kind of things. But let's talk about some other aspects of the film. I mean, Coppola starts out by stating that he wanted to create an art film for kids. And I watch this film now, I'm 45 years old, and I don't know how, probably none of this really stuck out to me like on a conscious level when I was like 10, but I watched this film and there's like an orgy scene, my God. There's like,
nudity
it's
and
not,
yeah.
it's not like, it's not outrageous in this. I mean, there's a small amount of nudity, and it's suggestive more than graphic or anything. So I don't mean to imply that there's like this graphic orgy scene. There's not, but certainly I think it might be more sexually suggestive and more physical than like maybe any other scene he's ever done in any of his other films. I mean, he very rarely has this kind of nudity and physical intimacy, but
there's the cut scene in Apocalypse Now of like the Playboy bunnies, and that's in the Redux, but
but it's
the
not,
version didn't have it. Yeah,
especially considering that these are children. But again, it's shot in a way where it's not, it doesn't feel gratuitous. But for but this is like he set out to make an R-rated kids film, which is like I mean, I want to say mind-blowing, but I'm just going to say it's like amazing. It's awesome. You likely would not see anything like this made today, sadly. I would say the language,
or if it was, it would be buried. You would never get.
Yeah, I don't think it would
release
fly.
and
And especially, I mean, look, when you add up, I mean, the fact that it's black and white, that's not going to fly. The fact that it's got no plot. I mean, there's basically no plot in this film. It's kind of like a study of existentialism, with this like overarching theme of time and time running out. You've got it's a very small film. It's a very personal story, and again, I don't know that this film could be made today, which is heartbreaking to me. And maybe it could, and maybe I'm just maybe it would end up somewhere not in a theatrical release. But even in its day, this film was not very commercially successful, and it's only
even critically. I mean, a lot of critics loved it. Yeah,
yeah. So it's only been kind of in hindsight that the film has kind of developed a little bit of a following, and has kind of garnished some love in hindsight. But some other cool things about this film too, and I'm not sure how much of this that you kind of read about, but the process for the preparation that Coppola went through to put this together is like is pretty innovative, especially for its era, and pretty unique. I mean, he kind of devised this really cool system of almost like, I don't know what you'd call it, like live storyboarding. Basically, they would. It was
sort of like an early version of Previs, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like totally like, it's like an early version of Previs, but with actual live actors, live performances, not CGI, obviously. So they had this big chalkboard. And so they'd have their, somebody there on the team. I don't know if it was specifically a storyboard artist or, production design. I'm not sure. But, somebody would be there and they would kind of sketch out the set for the scene. And then they would get the actors in front of a blue screen with a few props, and they would actually rehearse like a theatrical production. Like if I were putting on a play and I were working with an ensemble cast, and I would rehearse this for a couple months. That's exactly what Coppola did, which of course in film is extremely rare. And they actually would, I think they performed the entire film and rehearsed it and honed it in, and Coppola worked very diligently and for a long period of time with these actors, which I think is fascinating, and I think it shows. And Coppola has also been kind of technically innovative as well throughout his career. Yeah. And did you get to see some of that? I was really impressed with that.
I haven't seen the actual like footage of those rehearsals.
Yeah.
But I am definitely gonna look it up after, because that sounds like not only does it sound very interesting, but it sounds like a really useful tool. I've
I
done
know,
previs in
huh?
the past where I have used my, like, one of my, one of the things that I do for previs is I'll take, I just actually, for the feature I'm doing, went out to one of the locations the other day, and what I'll do is just basically bring my phone out and sort of point it at something and like use my fingers in front and sort of say, like, okay, here's our two actors, here's where you're standing in the frame, and then you're
Finger
coming up this
puppets.
way.
You do
It
finger
literally is finger
puppets.
puppets, yeah. And so I just basically narrate these videos, and then I'll do some of the camera movements very simply, of course, not like on a
Yeah.
tripod or anything,
Yeah, yeah.
and just with
That's
my phone.
awesome.
But it's one of the things that I really, and I don't do it for the whole movie. Like, I've never done that. But it's interesting that we bring this up now, because I didn't even know that he had done that, and I think that that's a really, really almost like ingenious way of
Well,
being able to plan something like that, especially because he had such, it was kind of a movie that was made on short notice in a
yeah.
weird way.
In a weird, yeah. I'm curious. I mean, I have a request. I would love to see like a scene of your finger puppet theater. If you
Gladly.
ever,
It's
do you
honestly,
do?
all of the casting crew that I send it to say that it's like their favorite things, because it's just like they
Okay.
always will bring up the fingers whenever.
You've got to do right when you have a release on physical media, you've got to include like
The finger puppets.
the finger puppets, right, as like an extra or a featurette or something. You've got to, like, I'm putting in my request now. I want to see it. I am like excited. I can't wait. So,
Of course, yes, yeah.
but I mean, that's awesome. I mean, I've always been fascinated too with, and I know he did this a lot with Outsiders as well. I mean, there was a long, extensive, casting and rehearsal process for that film. So,
Yes.
a lot of these actors who were in The Outsiders had already been through this long process with The Outsiders as well. And I think, especially working with younger actors, now clearly all of the people in this film are very talented, and they've all gone on to show that they're talented. Every one of them have had an interesting career. Um, uh, but I think, even with very talented people, I think a rehearsal process is usually a productive thing, and unfortunately, it doesn't happen very often in film because of budgetary constraints.
Yeah.
But it's something I frankly just also really enjoy, having come from theater. It's a process that I actually enjoy, both as an actor and as a director. So I was particularly fascinated about this, and I would be curious to explore modern technology that would enable this kind of pre-visualization plus rehearsal process kind of combined into one. And it's kind of like motivating me to look to see what kind of technology might exist out there to do this, in a modern way without, drawing on a big chalkboard. I don't even know how they did that. It was like they somehow had a chalkboard that digitized the chalk drawings, creating a sketch that they could use in blue screen. I don't even know how they did that, but
Yeah.
it was like a giant tablet. So there's probably like an app you can get on your iPad now and do that, Too bad I can't draw, worth two what.
Me neither.
Me either. So, I mean, speaking of drawing, speaking of painting with light, let's talk about cinematography. Do you like that? I'm like
Yes.
so good with segues. I'm
Yeah,
proud
no, there
of
you
my
go.
segues.
It's like a second nature.
It's like second nature. I mean, the cinematography, and I think is one of the first. It's to me, it's the first thing that's, well, the score stands out instantly, but we're going to get to that. The score stands out instantly. That percussive Stuart Copeland score, but the cinematography. I'm sure, was that probably something? I mean, right away you noticed instantly. I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah. I know. I mean, I know just on a basic level that the influence is very interesting, but again, the part of the things that were really interesting to me were the things that seemed to, again, kind of go beyond those influences, and the almost like I wouldn't say the on-set choices, because I don't think that they were like improvised by any means, but the Coppola choices to me were what I really liked. That, again, I like seeing things like that where you can tell the influences of something. You can tell, again, with the set paintings or the time-lapse photography that he kind of used from Koyaanisqatsi and was inspired by Koyaanisqatsi to do, or the very
there's like German
avant-garde.
expressionism.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
There's the painted shadows. There, I mean, just the fact that it's black and white, like high
but then
contrast.
seeing a director kind of take that and morph it into their own thing is always what's kind of the primary interest to me. Is how does somebody move beyond the influences?
Stephen Burham shot it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he, if I'm not mistaken, he was the DP, the cinematographer for Outsiders, right?
Yes, yeah, I think most of the cast and crew,
Carried over,
or especially most of the crew, was carried over from The Outsiders. Yeah.
which is really amazing to me because it shows this range that, I mean, I personally was, I mean, obviously, like, when I first watched this film, I didn't know, it's Burham from Adam or anything else. I mean, that would have never crossed my mind. But now, as an adult watching it, I am really impressed that he shot both of these pictures. They look so completely different.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, I mean, immediately this high contrast, beautiful black and white photography that to me just is mesmerizing. I am just mesmerized by the quality of this photography. The I think 35 was the longest lens they used, with the exception of one small walk and talk scene where they used a longer lens, and I'm not sure what, but probably 100 plus. Some of this stuff is shot on a sub 10 millimeter lens, but they framed it in such. I mean, it's just captivating. There's so much smoke and fog. I mean, it's amazing how they make Tulsa look like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. I'm like thinking about Mad Max
Yeah, the
again.
smoke was something that really was that what I think was really interesting to me and what really stood out to me was that there's this, you see the smoke, the opening shot is the clouds passing overhead,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and then it's like the clouds are in the city. Like there's always
Yeah,
almost this constant, like almost cloud movement or mist or fog or smoke that's moving really quickly through all of the
everywhere,
cityscapes and all that,
almost
and
every scene.
which obviously of course is intentional. I mean, it's very clear that they had set
Yeah,
up some sort of machines and generators to do that, but I thought it was really neat that um it's like bringing the sky down. Like it was such a
that's an
unique
interesting
choice that I never,
interpretation. Yeah,
I've never seen that in a movie before. And then even when they're, that it's like it's not time lapse because it's when they're sitting and they're talking, when he and Nick Cage's character, who's what's the midget is the name, right?
yeah.
When they're leaning outside the little milk bar
Smoky,
thing.
Smoky,
Smoky. Oh,
Smoky.
Smoky. Okay, there's another
Midget,
character named Midget.
Lawrence, yeah, Lawrence Fishburne is
Fishburne.
midget,
Okay. Okay.
and Cage is Smoky. Yeah,
Because they don't really use names too much,
not
and
too
all the
much.
names are
Yeah,
very very lingo-ish. But there's Matt Dillon and Nick Cage's characters are sitting outside this milk bar, sort of near the latter half of the movie, and they're discussing something, and the clouds and the reflection of
well, they've got that
the
beautiful
window
special effects
are,
shot.
yeah,
That's a
and
it's a really beautiful. It's some kind of
well done,
projection shot.
incredibly done, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
and
there's
you
a lot of rear
notice
projection in this as well because the fish being in color was also rear projection.
that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. That was the way that they could do that before any kind of computer process was available.
Yeah.
You're right. They shot a plate of Mickey Rourke and Matt Dillon and pretending to be in front of a aquarium, and then they shot a color plate of the actual aquarium with the fish, and only the fish had any color in them. So when they superimposed that over the back plate, you had color fish and black and white actors.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting
But
that you
I'm
mentioned.
curious to know how they did that shot of the fog of them leaning against the wind. Like I'm actually curious
Well,
what process that was.
I
'Cause
wish
it
that I could
looks
reiterate
flawless.
to you. Yeah, I
Yeah.
wish that I could reiterate to you exactly technically how they did it. But I can say that on the Criterion Collection, they actually do have a really wonderful conversation between the cinematographer and the production design head, and they actually discuss that and explain that shot in length. And I am so sorry that I cannot here reproduce the perfect technical explanation for
Well, hey,
how they did
that's
that.
homework for everyone who's listening.
It's
to,
homework for everybody, but they did. It is kind of a couple plates where they've got Nick Cage and they've got Matt Dillon speaking in front of the window, but they put some kind of coating or something on the window and have some kind of projection of this time-lapse photography shot in a totally different place. And my explanation is not doing it quite justice, but it is awesome, and I highly recommend everybody check it out. There's a lot of actually fantastic.
Which I mean, it's funny that this theme deals with, or this movie deals with the themes of kind of like the quick passage of time. That like as a kid things seem like eons again, but that things are passing so quickly that you had this exact fear as a child of like this idea that when your grandparents were leaving, it was going to be the last time you saw. Like that you almost on the opposite level felt that quick passage of time.
Well, it is
Which is
odd.
kind of neat.
And
Yeah.
clocks are a common theme. I mean, I think there's practically every scene of this film has a clock, and if there's not
Yeah.
a clock in it
Yeah.
visually, then the score
It's
has
like, yeah,
some
the
kind
very
of ticking, some clock ticking or heart beating. I mean, it is so, and some people, a criticism might be made that some of this is on the nose, and maybe that's valid in some places, and Coppola even maybe kind of admits to that a little bit, but you know what? I think it works, so whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it's also it's an art film. You're allowed to be
yeah,
on the nose.
come on. I mean, I
There's
think
no
let's
rules.
talk a little bit too, because you're right. I mean, we talk about all these things: the wide angle, the black and white, the smoke, and it's funny. You talked about how that really stood out to you. I like your kind of your idea here that it's almost like there's a lot of this time lapse of the fast moving clouds, but then you have this fast moving smoke down below, and it's almost like you've brought the clouds somehow down to the earth or something. It's very interesting. For me, it's so funny. I just accepted that there's like smoke everywhere. I don't even remember like thinking anything about it. I never even questioned it when I was younger. But in the commentary, Coppola talks about their kind of inspiration for some of this, at least is to kind of like ground it in some kind of reality, would be that in the area they would burn grass
Oh,
in controlled burns to
yeah.
to kind of keep brush from getting out of hand. So that's kind of like their inspiration for that, or at least they're kind of like, we can use this explanation to kind
Justification.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
justification for grounding it. But it's so funny that I didn't even notice. I mean, not on a conscious level. I didn't even care. But if of course you watch it though and you look at it and it's like these. There's an example where the kids get off the bus. It's Diane Lane
When
and
they're
Matt
fighting.
Dillon
Yeah. Yeah.
and Sophia Coppola. They get off the bus and it's just like there's just like giant smoke bombs going off
Yeah,
everywhere.
it looks like they're walking through like a
A
nuclear
mi-
wasteland. Like
it
it's
does.
fun. But again, it doesn't
It
it doesn't
works.
yeah, it
It
doesn't like take
works.
like I wasn't sitting there going like, "Oh, come on, this is, ridiculous." I was sitting there going
Yeah.
like they're having a tense moment in their relationship, and it's like
Yeah.
this again, you get it's like a motif. It's this motif of like again because of course the clouds quite obviously and quite literally are referring to the passage of time and stuff,
Yes.
that it's like every single mistake he makes in the movie, every time he makes a bad decision,
Yeah.
there's this like reminder that like time's ticking, like you're not going to have a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really interesting that
Yeah.
again and again, like we talked about with the clocks and things like that and the music score and stuff, that it's kind of on the nose, but that's not.
But it works. They
Yeah,
pull it
it
off.
works, and
I
yeah, I
think.
think that it's yeah, I think
Yeah.
it just adds a layer to it that I think is really neat. And it's not it's not like every movie hazes and uses smoke, and especially back like pre 2010.
Right.
So many movies were just like, you just feel. We talked about E.T. when we were doing the Spielberg episode, how those rooms are just like loaded with smoke.
Right, or any
Man,
Tony Scott film,
yeah,
any Ridley
yep,
Scott film, the Scott
yeah.
brothers, they love the haze.
Yeah,
But
and I think it's a great. I honestly really
I
like the
love
look
it.
of,
I love
of
it.
fog and haze
I,
and things like that. So
I'm so motivated to shoot in black and white now. I can't tell you. Having just recently watched The Elephant Man, having just watched this again, I am
yeah,
so motivated to do a project.
I'll tell
in
you,
black
I've
and white.
never, as aside from like small projects, I've never done a full, like, whether it's a short or
feature.
of course a
Yeah.
feature in black and white. I've never, and I've always wanted to, but I've just never really found the right project to kind of like do
It
that. I think
really
it's,
speaks to me.
again, I think it's really a specific
is
thing that
it?
you've got to find. I don't know,
What
but
is
I
it?
love it.
What
I do
is
love
it?
it.
I'm,
And
I
again,
am
this movie would be totally different if it was in color. It would
totally different,
Yeah.
a completely different experience. It'd
Yeah.
also be a completely different experience if it were different actors. I mean, let's talk
Yes.
a little bit about these
Yeah.
performances, man. I mean, it's tough that you find so many young performers, and I think especially with Outsiders, you look at who was in that, look at who's in this. I mean, Coppola clearly is, and throughout his entire career, is like very, very good at finding and recognizing talented people, and then working with them well. And we already talked about the rehearsal process for this film, but Matt Dillon, I think, is perfectly cast for this. Which
Yeah.
is, but this is not who he is at all. It's not like he's kind of this dumb Midwestern
Like
kid.
bad boy, yeah.
He's
yeah,
not
yeah.
even close. Yeah.
No.
But he works so well, and the performance that I really, really want to kind of just talk about, just because I was so moved by this, is Mickey Rourke's performance.
It's
You and
incredible, yeah.
You and I talked a little bit about this before we started. We were kind of warming up, but I think for younger people. Again, I feel like I'm always talking like I'm like people's grandpa. For you younger people,
Back in my day.
whatever, forget it. Too bad, sorry.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what I sound like when I'm 65. Oh my gosh, But it's true. But it's true though. I mean, I grew up. I was like just coming of age, just becoming kind of like cinema aware when Mickey Rourke's career was first taking off with Diner, with this film, with a Pope of Greenwich Village. Barfly. His early work is just outstanding. I cannot recommend enough for those of you who are unfamiliar with Mickey Rourke's earlier work to go back and watch it. And it is such a heartbreaking shame to me that I don't, not that I want to try to speak for him, but it's my understanding that he kind of sort of developed a resentment for the craft and the industry very much in the same way that Marlon Brando did in his later years.
Yeah.
And of course it shows, and his life took a different trajectory. And I think he's a very different, performer and person now, although of
and
course
the projects that he takes on are
he
totally
still has these flashes of greatness. The Wrestler from 10 years ago or so, I think is an example of that greatness that's still there. But I mean,
not Iron Man 2.
not Iron Man 2. But I would highly recommend, and you'll kind of maybe get a glimpse of why there was so much like oohing and awing over this performer when he first hit the scene. I mean, his performance is outstanding.
Yes.
Outstanding in this film.
It's so I think one of the interesting things that that Coppola specifically told him to kind of study like Napoleon and things like that, and I think that you really see that come through, that he's this really gentle, like wandering philosophical kind of soul.
Yeah, he's like a French philosopher. I think Camus was like was kind of used as kind of
like this gentle giant almost.
But listen to his voice, like the vocal nature of his performance is so impressive.
And if you want to see another really impressive Rourke performance that was cut out of a movie, actually, was The Thin Red Line. He's got a deleted scene in that movie, and Rourke actually said at the time, and still kind of refers to that as he thinks that it's some of the best work he's ever done.
And this is
so
on
I really recommend that.
Is there a Criterion?
I think you can find them on YouTube. Honestly, I think you can find the Mickey Rourke scene just online. Yeah, I'm sure it's on the Criterion as well.
Maybe we'll do The Thin Red Line at some point when we do some Malick stuff.
That is one of my favorite movies. So
and
I would be happy.
Well, there you go. It sounds like we might know a future episode right off the bat. I will save it for that.
Spoiler alert! But no,
alert.
I think that it really this movie really goes to show how, like you said, like how talented, and not that Matt Dillon is a lesser actor by no means.
No.
But I think that to use the term Rourke, dances around Dillon, is not, again, it's not me putting down Matt Dillon's performance, because I think every performance in this movie is so specialized.
The roles are different,
really great. But Rourke really is he steals every scene he's in. Even it takes, think of how, I don't know how specifically how old he was in this movie, but
young, 29.
It's insane to be 29 and to be stealing the show from Dennis Hopper when you're on screen with him is nuts to me. And Dennis Hopper's great in it too.
Dennis Hopper is great in it. I mean,
Dennis Hopper, what I think is actually, just to really quickly talk about him, is when Dennis Hopper gets in this movie, like when he comes on screen in this movie, the energy shifts. And I think that's really interesting. Like that it's like this entire, it feels like there's just like a gravity that suddenly like enters the scene. I found that watching it, like even
it's like the suns, like the suns, the suns are orbiting around the father. I mean, you're right. There's this gravity, and it's the first time that this family has been together in at least a couple months. I mean, it's funny. I think they say in the film that the motorcycle boy, which is Mickey Rourke's character, he does not have he's not named in the book or in this film on purpose. And that again kind of speaks to some of this like mythological underpinnings that I talked about earlier. But they kind of want him to exist outside of this world, in a bigger, larger way. But apparently, he's only been gone for a couple months. Well, and you talked about as a child, for most of us, 2 months is like a lifetime if you're 16 or, but yeah, I mean, the elder son comes back, and now they're here in this children, or or grown children or older children are orbiting this father. But yeah, it's just fantastic. It's my understanding too that Hopper was a little bit of a challenge to work with. Surprising, but I think the scene where they are at the bar, which is just exquisitely shot, where you have this beautiful wide angle with Mickey Rourke and Matt Dillon kind of bookending the foreground, and you have Hopper in the midground, and it's so beautiful. This deep focus shot. I think that something like 40 plus takes for that, because Hopper was just like not doing whatever it was that Coppola wanted from him, but just
or something,
or maybe it was, I think, because there's some outtakes where Hopper's like, I want to do it again. Can I get another take? But
well, it's interesting because it's like this, because there's the one shot that I mentioned that I actually screenshot it because I loved it so much, in that exact scene where Hopper, it's like this close-up of Hopper, you see the reflect, looks very similar to a lot of shots of Martin Sheen and Apocalypse Now, but of course the black and white just adds this simplicity to it that's really beautiful. And it's just like, it's unlike any other shot in the movie. It's this steady close, like just this, like probably shot on a 50, probably longer than any other shot. There can't lens. I think it's probably the only shot in the movie that's shot on anything longer than like a 35.
Yeah,
and it's just this incredible. Like the cigarette smoke is rising above him, and you just see this again. We talked a little bit about how it feels very theatrical, and I think that there's no performance in this movie that kind of speaks to that more than Dennis Hopper's. That he, like all the performances in this movie are very, very theatrical in a way that it feels like in a very good way.
Heightened.
Very heightened. And,
yeah.
But Hopper's is, I could almost see Hopper entering a scene. It feels like he's walking on stage. Like it's bizarre. Like it's I can't much like you trying to explain.
But
your
not
love
in
for
a
this
bad
movie.
way. Not in a bad way, not in a distracting way. It's like
it's a feeling. It's not necessarily like a literal, like you feel like he's walking out of the wings and coming on.
Yeah.
But rather that this, there's a difference always. An entrance on stage, to me at least, is always a little bit different than an entrance in film, just because the stage is such a like contained area.
Right.
And I think that's what I feel like with Hopper's role in this, is that it's like, because the way that it's written and the way that it's presented is very theatrical, that it reminds me a lot of almost like a Tennessee Williams character. Like that's kind of what he reminds me of, is this character that's plucked out of, again, this like mythology of Americana, this mythology of
southern United States,
and this like Dust Bowl kind of aspect to him, and that he comes on and he's like this wall of enigma and mystery, but also this kind of like, he does seem relatively caring in a way that
well, and there's these moments of like wisdom, right? There's these moments of like, it's not that he's, I mean, he understands the world, he understands his sons, he understands what's going on, and he understands, I think, why he drinks. This is not an ignorant character. No. And we don't know much about him, and we don't, we hear very little about, a big part of the plot. We haven't talked much about plot, and you and I aren't really consumed with trying to regurgitate a plot on these podcasts, but, other aspects of, that we just get through these snippets, that their mother left, their mother moved to California, their mother is living with some producer, maybe still, we don't know. We don't know anything about their mother. We don't know anything about why they left. We don't know, did their father start drinking before and that's why she left, or is he drinking because she left? We don't,
or is the motorcycle boy just telling this to, Matt Dillon to...
We don't know.
Yeah. It's never, we never see the mom. We never,
And it's all the better for it. It's all the better for it, because if those kinds of things were explained so explicitly, like most films feel the absolute undeniable urge to do, this film would not allow people like me to give it the meaning that, to be an active audience member, which is what I want to be, which is what I want from a film, and have a film become a part of my life and grow with me like this film has grown. And that's the detriment. I just, for fellow filmmakers out there, when you want to explain every single thing away in your film, that's what you take away from an audience. Just FYI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I gotta have like a moment of soapbox, right? I think that's like that should be a thing. Like I'm like a big gas bag of just like, I'll just get up on my soapbox.
It's been a pretty good, like, a through line for this podcast, because I think that, even a few episodes ago when we did The Silence of the Lambs, one of Demi's like big filmmaking philosophies is that he would rather the audience be confused for 5 minutes than to explain away every single thing in a shot, right?
Which is so and it is
very rare.
It's so well, it's terrifying. It's terrifying because, and I will even start to see that in myself as a producer helping other people's work. And I have to really catch myself. I will, like, if any storytelling book or any screenwriting book rather that you see today, or any advice that you're ever going to hear from any kind of it's oh my gosh, the last thing you could possibly do is have an audience confused. Oh my goodness, don't ever have an audience confused. Don't ever have any we've moved from a place so far away from that where there's such a fear. This corporate fear of, oh my gosh, if we have any vagueness or if we have any potential for confusion, we're just going to lose
or
our
any
audience.
potential for interpretation, God forbid.
And to be fair, there is a fine line. I mean, I understand to some extent. It's like I never felt confused watching this film. I want to make that clear. Yeah. I never felt like that I was confused watching this film. There wasn't one moment that I didn't understand what was going on, that I couldn't follow the intention of the filmmaker, that I couldn't follow what was happening. Not one time did I feel confused. So vagueness and confusion are not the same things. They are not the same things. So
perhaps to kind of wrap that up in a neat bow again. One of the things that, like, an experience I had watching a movie recently was I was watching To the Wonder, which is, speaking of Malick, as we were just discussing a bit ago. It's a movie from 2012 that Malick made, starring Ben Affleck, and it's didn't get great reviews, but it's on Prime. If anyone has Prime, I really liked it though, and one of the things that very much related to my experience watching this movie was. There was a point where I missed a few lines of dialogue at the end of a scene. I can't remember what I think like my air conditioning had gone on, so I had to turn it up or something. It was just distracted for a moment.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, do I rewind it back? And then I kind of sat back and laughed to myself, and I was like, no, I have no idea what's going on anyway, and I'm loving it like I don't care. Like, I've got no idea what's going on. Well, but I was just, again, it was like I think it was this, like, it's like this subconscious understanding. Like, on a fundamental level, I understood what I was feeling, and I was connecting with the movie.
It's a visual
but just because
medium.
I didn't understand exactly, like, okay, why are they at this store
and that's
now?
the thing, this isn't literature. This isn't literature, and it's not literature. It's moving pictures, and there's a place for literature, and it's vital. But that's not what we're talking about. It is film. So I mean, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, because I do want to talk a little bit about the score before we wrap up. But just to kind of piggyback on what you're saying a little bit. I mean, one of a film that I very much am a fan of, and that I very much enjoyed watching, was Malick's. I think, is it The New World? The New World.
Yes, New World. Yeah.
2005, about Jamestown, I think it was, or
it's the Pocahontas story, but
Pocahontas
it's told
story.
in a more dramatic sense than Pocahontas.
And it's funny, I saw that film in like a really weird way. So usually, like, I'm pretty conscientious about my film watching, in the sense that I prepare a space and a time, and I'm very focused, right? And I'm particular about the visual and audio circumstances of my viewing, right? But it just so happened that I was living with roommates in a home that was not mine, so I wasn't in charge of the television or the audio or anything else. And this was a while back. We had, like, one of these ancient, huge Mitsubishi rear projection TVs that are like super dim, super fuzzy. It's like each scan line is like a ½ inch wide, because it's like 65 inches of 480, and
yes,
and it's like projection.
Those were the days. I had
those were the
yeah.
days. And so it's like this horrible picture. And I think it was something like we had two huge like stereo speakers, not like audio visual, like not surround sound, but like just two big huge like Serwin Vega stereo speakers. And it was probably like, the amplifier was like not able to decode the surround sound correctly.
Yeah.
So like all of the like center channel dialogue was lost. So I'm sitting here watching the film. I didn't put it on. I just happened to like be in the living room when a roommate started watching it. And through the film, I could understand maybe 15% of the dialogue, maybe. And I was so captivated by the film. I was
Yeah.
blown away by the film. It was an extraordinary experience. It was profoundly moving. And that just is like every time I get in a place where I get like so wound around the axle about dialogue when I'm working on my own stuff, I just remind myself, I'm like, wait a minute. Remember that time when you couldn't even hear the dialogue and you kind of like, it was like half mumble, like most of the movie was mumbling, and it ended up being an extraordinary experience for you. I was like, just remember that.
No, exactly. Yeah. No, it's totally like, again, film is more than the script. It's more than
Yeah, it's more than dialogue.
It's
Yeah.
performances are more than dialogue. I
That's
think
that's theater.
yeah.
That's theater is about dialogue, and television to a great extent is like theater, and
Yeah.
that's about dialogue. But that's
Yeah.
not film, and it's not to say the dialogue's not important. Of course it is.
Yeah,
But
or that there can be dialogue heavy films that are great, but
it's a different beast. It's a different beast. Well, let's wrap up here with a topic, a part of the film that I think is really vital to its personality and impact, and we've not touched on it yet, and that is the score. Stuart Copeland of
the Police,
did the score for this. It's a percussive, heavy score, and it is absolutely unique. It is totally untraditional. It's the vast majority of it is comprised of a lot of loops. There is a lot like car horns and
and like
jackhammers.
almost sounds like it's like drumsticks on like tin cans at some points
there's
too.
so many, right, and everything is about time ticking. So there's this constant tick 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 tick, and there's heartbeats. There's all of these, and this is way back in the analog days, and so they literally, like today you go on Pro Tools and you make a loop, and that just means that you have a snippet of something that repeats, but this is literally like they're splicing actual tape loops together on a big, like 24 track board, and they've got, literally looping tape.
There's a reason that they were called audio engineers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But it's, I just think it's an extraordinary piece. And I think the film, I mean, it's so important to the success of this film, to the feeling, to the tone of this film.
I would say not expected.
Yeah. Tell me. Like,
again, there's a lot of point. Like it's definitely, as in case you couldn't tell, it's not a traditional film score. But it again, there's this element to this and The Outsiders, that where it's like Coppola uses score in areas that I wouldn't have necessarily expected him to, and it's not a bad thing. But I always thought that was really, and I remember noticing that, and it was one of the things that has always stuck with me about The Outsiders, even though I haven't seen it in. So if I was in grade 8, it's been 10 years at least since I've seen that movie. 10 or 11 years. And that fact that always stuck with me is something that, again, was like one of those things that I just always thought was kind of odd about it.
Yeah.
And then when I was, it like brought me back in this movie when I went, there's a moment when he's talking to his girlfriend outside, and they're like, there's this almost drum beat that's got a little bit of like kind of a melody to it, but not very melodic.
Yeah.
And
Expressive.
they're just standing there having a conversation, and it's like there's this music below it that doesn't really fit.
But time.
Again,
it's like
it's exactly
it's
like
always
this,
like this chasing.
It's they're wasting time, and everything has an urgency. Even when they, right after that, they go inside, and Sofia Coppola is sitting beside them, who's his girlfriend's younger sister, sitting beside them on the couch, and it's like this urgency, like, go away, we don't have a lot of time, like, get out of here.
And it reminds me a little bit, like the birth history of this podcast, talking, and Herzog almost always has these very unique and non-traditional scores for his films. And I feel like this is very much at home. I could very much see the score being in a Herzog film.
Totally, yeah.
And I just it's really quite extraordinary, and there is really an exceptional featurette on the production of the score with Stuart Copeland on the Criteria Collection disc, which I really highly recommend people check out. But I don't know. I just want to, we can wrap up now. I just want to say, I mean, there's so much more that I could say about the film. We've really only scratched the surface in an hour and 10 minutes here. And, I could pontificate on this well past when people would want to listen to it. But, I just can't recommend it enough. If you've not seen the film, check it out. The ending of the film, I was really, again, I was surprised at the emotional impact the end of the film had for me. Still to this day, it's just the motif of the rumblefish. We hadn't talked anything about that, but this idea that a caged being will consume itself for those around it if they have no freedom is another
that fights
theme
itself in the reflection, and
this just really beautiful the finale of the film, the climax of the film, where the motorcycle boy Mickey Rourke's character, he doesn't rob this pet store. He releases the animals in the store, and there's a really quick fun story about that. So one of Coppola's first films, The Rain People, starring isn't that is Michael Caine? No, who's in that? Not Michael Caine.
Oh God,
come on! I've
please.
totally.
I'll get it up real quick.
You're like, how fast can you type into Google?
The urgency.
Yeah, exactly. We need a soundtrack.
James Caan and Robert
Caan
Duvall.
is what I meant to say. There's a
Shirley
scene,
Knight.
There's a scene in that film where I think, if I'm not mistaken, where Caan works at like a weird petting zoo or something, if I'm not mistaken. There's like a lot of these small animals in cages, and he releases these animals in that story. And so the scene is here in this film, right, where the motorcycle boy comes back. He breaks into this pet store, and he's releasing these birds and all these animals in this cage. Well, it's in the book, and Coppola's, he's working with the script with S.E. Hinton, and he's like, hey, this is so funny. This is kind of a weird coincidence. I shot the scene in an early film of mine. And she's like, oh, that's real weird, because I actually was watching a movie with James Caan. I don't remember what the name was. And there was this scene where he was releasing all these animals, and it totally inspired me to write the scene in the book.
Oh, wow. Goes full circle. That's hilarious.
I know. So
oh, my gosh.
I know. So
that's insane, yeah.
It's like, who would imagine? But it's just this beautiful idea of like, he's got to bring these fish, it's the only thing in the film that has any color in it, except there's an exception I'll talk about in a second. But to carry them to the river to set them free, and the authority figure, this ever looming authority figure, which we hadn't talked about, this police officer, shoots him dead, and then Matt Dillon carries the fish the final length and sets them free in the river. And Matt Dillon's character, Rusty James, has this moment of color vision when he's after he does that, and he's being held briefly by the police before they let him go. It's just, wow, I might get emotional talking about it now, but when that last scene where Rusty James finally does make it to the ocean, where he rides his motorcycle, and it's this extraordinary shot, I think, where he's at the pier, he's at the ocean, there's these seagulls everywhere, and it's just... I don't know. I don't even know where I'm headed with this. I'm just describing the movie now, which is like the worst thing you want to do. I'm just describing scenes, but oh my God, I mean, I don't know. It's really extraordinary film. I don't know. That's all I've got left. I'm getting carried away.
No, I think I would just go watch. It's on YouTube. It's on the Criterion. I think there's a Criterion release. Isn't
I
there?
think it's online. It's online. There's a Criterion release. But anyway, well, with all that being said, Cullen, as always, man, it's a pleasure. I so enjoy talking about these films with you, and especially this one. And it's especially cool to me to get to share it with somebody who's not seen it before. So I'm
Yes,
really
yeah.
happy that it's a film that you enjoyed. And for everybody listening, I hope if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's really worthy of a watch. And until next time, we wish you all a wonderful week, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, bye-bye.